Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. We're going to jump right in and first tell you a little story to kind of put some things in context. So we can go to the next slide. So this is a story that appeared this year in The Economist, and it's really talking about the return to one-to-one commerce. And it really gave a lot of insight into how to think about some aspects of where the world is, but it also gave a really good insight into where we came from. So on the next slide, I wanted to introduce you to Jeff Johnson. And Jeff Johnson is Nike's first ever full-time employee. And Jeff opened their first ever store in Santa Monica. And among the things that Jeff did was he took very, very good care of the customers. This is from 1966. That's the Volkswagen van there. One of the things he would do is keep a card catalog of customers that included obviously their shoe size, but things like their holidays, birthdays, and he stayed in touch with them over the years to really make it a place that people felt like they were known and understood, and it really drove them to the store. So throughout that process, he would also provide supportive messages when they had big races, and it really became not just a place to buy your shoes, but it really kind of became an emotional resource, if you will, for the product. Next slide. And so the challenge, however, is as Nike grew and grew and grew, and they would just do it, and they would get different people endorsing their products, they didn't really have this one-to-one customer relationship. And it's not a surprise, but it's also something that they had some lament about over the years. But then as you get further along, get the next slide. The firm has really been pivoting a bit since 2017. They really cut the cord with some of their wholesalers, which includes Amazon. And they've really been better about focusing on a direct-to-consumer policy. Next slide. And so now direct-to-consumer actually accounts for about 40% of Nike's revenues. Its shoppers' use of digital technologies enabled Nike to recreate what they're calling a one-to-one world, according to their marketplace spokesperson. And it's the kind of thing that we think is a really good reminder of everything we're going to talk about today in personalization. It's not all new. The tools are new. A lot of what we're talking about is really how to take some of the ethos and the spirit of what Jeff did years ago and apply it in new and creative ways with the tools that are available in 2021 and beyond. Next slide. So my name is Chad Kapellman. I'm a senior solutions architect at Unleashed Technologies. I've been working 25 years online. Time flies. And I'm really, really honored to be here today. I've been a part of WBC. I'm on the advisory council. I've been helping from a digital advisory capacity for a while. And I've just really been impressed with the nature of the network, what people are bringing to it, and how people are helping each other. So we're really happy to share this presentation today. And I'm joined by my colleague, Lauren Brady.
Hi, everybody. So glad to also be here today. I'm Lauren Brady, and I'm the Senior Sales and Proposal Writer at Unleashed. I have a BA in English and my master's in publishing from George Washington University. And I've spent about 4 years now in the proposal strategy and proposal writing space. And this includes work in government, financial services, manufacturing, association, and nonprofit, healthcare, and education industries. I also have some experience with content creation from C-suite reports to web copy and some brand identity messaging, which includes just crafting an impactful story for a brand. So now that I've told you a little bit more about me and you know more about Chad, I'll dive into a little bit more about Unleashed Technologies and who we are as an organization. So Unleashed is a full service digital firm, and as a company and as individuals, we strive to be the best without exceptions or excuses. We have been serving this marketplace for more than 14 years, and we're a team of about 50 plus certified web developers, designers, sales and marketing specialists, and we're a 3-time Inc. 5000 recipient. And we have been rated the number one digital firm in the Maryland, DC, and Baltimore areas by the independent research firm Clutch.co, as well as the number 1 Drupal development firm and number 5 for B2B service providers. So we really encourage everyone to check us out on Clutch.co. We have over 36 5-star client reviews. It's really a great independent source to learn more about who we are as a company, the type of initiatives we've worked on, and some of our client testimonials. We are also a certified Acquia personalization partner, and we were one of the first companies to be certified. So over the years, Unleashed has maintained a 90% client satisfaction rating and a 95% client retention rating. And we're really proud of that retention rating because we really try to build long-term meaningful partnerships with our clients. And many of them have been with us for numerous years. We've worked with more than 150 clients, and with those clients have won more than 40 awards in both design and development. Our core technologies are open source and include Drupal, Symfony, which is the underpinning of newer Drupal, WordPress, and Adobe Commerce, which is formerly Magento. We have a range of clients spanning from financial services like Sandy Spring Bank to manufacturing with Dixon, as well as numerous associations such as the Association of the United States Army and some more well-known clients like the National Public Radio. And each group is very different, as you can see, but our team really brings a broad perspective to help support each of our clients in their respective industries.
And we're also a part of the Mid-Atlantic Marketing Summit. And as such, we actually have 2 passes that we're giving away. So if anybody is interested, feel free to shoot an email to Scott Shepard, our marketing director, with the subject line WBC at Marketing Summit. And the information is also in the chat, so don't worry, you don't have to scratch it down right now really quickly. But if you can reply by 4 o'clock today, you'll be entered, and we're happy to share the experience of the summit. So before we get into some of the details on the how and the what, we wanted to just provide a little bit of background around some of the stats and trends and context to help give you a better perspective on ways to approach this endeavor. So this really jumped out at me in our research, this idea that brand is becoming less and less of a primary factor, and user experience is on the upswing. And this was underscored by a Forbes Insight study that found that only 25% of business leaders really believe customers are loyal to brands. They say that 62% say the concept of loyalty is now close to being obsolete. And an Accenture study that found 81% of consumers want brands to understand them better, which really dovetails into the user experience piece. So this really means that there's a greater requirement around the creation of experiences that are informed by people's preferences and interests. And it really puts more of an obligation on organizations to listen, process, and then react in ways that align with those expectations from the customer. A study found that 92% of marketers say customers and prospects expect personalized experiences, which is up from 85% in 2019. And 90% of US customers find that personalized marketing content is somewhat too very appealing. Seems to be a broad consensus. Doesn't seem like there's a lot of things that you get this much of a consensus on. However, it does seem to be the trend. 79% of consumers really believe that companies know too much about them, according to a 2019 study, which is a really important thing to keep in mind, because what that means to different people might mean different things. And so being judicious and thinking about not just what you're trying to glean, but how you're using it and making sure everyone understands how it's being used is a key part of a successful program. Next slide. So this is a study of some of the types of information that people, US users, internet users, are comfortable sharing. And it covers everything from gender, race, marital status, religious preferences, place of birth. And you can see the numbers range a lot. And it also seems to be diminishing a bit on certain fronts. So I think people are coming around to the idea that their data is important and it is something that needs to be used carefully. But there is still a way to build trust. And we're going to talk about some of those as well. We also work in the banking and finance sector, and some of our research was specifically focused around the banking industry. And we were noticing that customers tend to be more lenient around providing location details and some of their purchase behavior. As you get into some things like all the way down to health data, obviously there's a reason the HIPAA exists. And so you want to be cognizant of what you're you're asking and making sure that you're thinking through the context of it, because you can meet with resistance and really turn a well-meaning program into something that's not exactly what you intended. Next slide. And 77% of those surveyed in this particular survey said they would trust businesses more if they just explained how they're using the personal information, which it sounds very reasonable, right? So I think it's a key thing to keep in mind as we talk through data collection and these understandings and these steps, is to make sure that internally your organization understands how it's being used, which will then make the communication to your audiences a lot easier. Next slide. And we don't want everybody to think that everyone else is ahead of the game on this. Most organizations kind of feel like they're flying blind to some degree. 2019 Gartner survey found that most organizations feel that they don't really have an effective personalization strategy and roadmap. And so this is something that I find it encouraging when people are trying to get started. This isn't a situation where you're last and there's no way to catch up. There's a lot of work involved, and we're going to talk about some of that. And so we just want to make sure people have the right context around how everyone else is feeling about the situation. And so with that, I wanted to make sure that we were encouraging as well as informative. And so I'm a former sports writer, and so I tend to gravitate to certain quotes that have stuck with me, including from the great John Wooden, who once said, "Never let what you can't do interfere with what you can do." And I think that's a really good ethos to have throughout a process like this, because there's a lot of options, and you can easily get distracted or feel like you can't do certain things, but there's a lot that can be accomplished that can really help move the ball, pardon the pun, towards your goals. And another thing is about measurement. You know, a friend of mine once said, "Everything worth doing is worth measuring," and that's really stuck with me. It means different things to different people, but understanding kind of what to measure and how to compare it is a really big deal. And then I have a very sarcastic friend who likes to turn his head and say, "Are you right or are you sure?" when he talks to me sometimes. And he means well, but I think it's a really good thing to keep in mind in terms of having a healthy skepticism to what you're seeing and not making blind assumptions that you're going to run out the door with to act on. You want to make sure that the methodologies are solid, that the source material is valid, and that you're really applying it in a way that makes sense for your strategic goals. Next slide. So what we've done in this presentation is we put together what we're calling 5-ish steps towards making a lot of progress towards the ultimate goal. And this is a lot more of kind of getting to the starting line in a lot of ways, but making sure that you're getting there with momentum, with a really good organization, and with clarity among the people on your team. And so these steps include establishing a team, setting the right goals, really reviewing data in a proper way, understanding how to think about segmenting your users, and then thinking about the content that's going to really align with your understanding of what those audiences' needs are. And then you're all set. That's it. Not really. But I think it's a good set of steps to keep in mind, so that as you are pursuing this, you can really have internal buy-in and internal clarity around what the bandwidth is and those kind of things required to do this successfully. Next slide.
So as Chad mentioned, the first step here is really thinking about and establishing your team. So as we dive into this, it's important to note that I'll be going over quite a few different roles, and you don't necessarily need to have one person in each of these individual roles, but it's worth thinking about who will wear what hat and where they will fit into this process. So here are all of the roles, and what's most important to drive home is that each role should really be tied back to the data analyst, as data does drive so much of personalization effort. And it's really pertinent that each member of the team has a relationship with the data analyst and that they are comfortable having an open dialogue with them. Interestingly, 74% of marketing leaders report that they struggle to scale personalization efforts due to staffing challenges, because this is no small feat, and establishing the right team for this process is very crucial. So the data analyst is really going to be responsible for gathering, reviewing, and distilling data to support user journeys and content recommendations. Data analysts should be responsible, available to their team, curious, and communicative. And when I say curious, I mean curious about where data can take them. A good data report should really be raising additional questions. So it's really important that your data analyst embraces that curious quality. It's also helpful that the data analyst be a good storyteller, so that they can make key data points really resonate with your internal audiences to help them better understand who your team is really trying to target. And next, it's really important to get an executive sponsor or someone at a high level to help move pieces around within an organization to get the necessary resources and buy-in, because personalization tends to cut across so many silos and a lot of platforms. Without this person, you could have kind of a fragmented situation, and that's not going to be the best when advocating for the user. And next, one of the most important is a customer experience advocate. This person is really going to be running point on role playing, if you will, as the user. This person is looking out for potential hiccups or missteps, specifically in a flow that works for the user. So they're communicating these potential issues back to the rest of the team and are always in touch with other roles. And without this person, it can be a slippery slope into creating something that your whole team has been working on really hard, but it's really not hitting the mark or helping you reach your goals. Next, you'll need a digital strategist who understands both the organization's needs and can translate those needs into digital tactics, which will then be executed as part of the process. The digital strategist can also serve as a translator for certain internal team members who might not fully grasp either how a certain technology works or how it needs to be handled when you're looking to create those personal experiences. And the next role is the content lead or leads. And we've added this as a plural because the content effort for personalization is not something that we necessarily recommend one person handle alone because it's a large undertaking. And when we're talking about content, we don't want to limit this to just text. This can also include video production as well as writing for different audiences and from different perspectives, and those are all part of the mix. You'll also need a technologist. This is someone who can understand each piece of the technology involved between a content management system, your CRM platform, and various other third-party platforms like an association management system or tools. We do a lot of work with Acquia, so that might include working with some of their tools. And ultimately, you want to learn how everything fits together really early in the process so that when decisions are being made through plans, there's nothing that falls through the cracks. So you don't have to scramble to adjust things, and you can really ensure that experience. And lastly, you'll need a user experience designer. And of course, most people work with one of these individuals when it comes to website redesign, and they probably will play a more traditional role than other roles in this, but they really need to think about how all of the different pieces are working together. So whether you're building customized buttons or certain widgets that have personalized content, their job is to just keep in mind how all of the pieces really fit together and work for the user.
And so once you have your team in place, it's really important to set goals. And from a big picture perspective, it's about a way of thinking as much as it is trying to check a box or achieve a certain specific goal. And I thought, who better than a transcendentalist to put some perspective to the overall project? And so I came across this Henry David Thoreau quote of, what you get by achieving your goals is not as important as what you become by achieving your goals. And we find this generally with a lot of website redesign projects anyway, but you have these sort of internal conversations and these sort of inflection points about who you are at that point and what you're becoming. And because this is becoming a behavioral approach to replying and responding to your customers' needs, it really doesn't have a choice but to change kind of the behavioral aspects of the organization. So when we talk about setting goals, we want to make sure that we're defining what can be personalized. We want to understand what are your key performance indicators. And this can take more time than you think. Sometimes it's easy to put a list of goals and think they're really useful KPIs, but it really does take time to dive into those a little bit more. You also want to make sure that you're determining which data is really important to achieve those goals. And then you want to develop a set of cross-platform user journeys, which is another area where understanding who is responsible for what in your organization and what those roadblocks are can be really helpful to determine early in a process. Next. So when we talk about defining what can be personalized, there's a lot of questions that you can kind of have at the ready to sort of vet everything as you're working through the process. And this can include things like asking, what data do you have that will really inform the personalization choices? How are you going to measure the success? Can you visually see your personalized content in its context? So sometimes things can appear on a screen and they're in conflict either subtly or overtly with other things on the page. So you want to make sure that you're accounting for that. And you also want to make sure that your organization has the bandwidth to support the content that you're looking to make. This can be something that doesn't have to be all at once. You can make sure that you roll out a plan that really aligns with your bandwidth, but recognizing that early is a really good thing to have under your belt, because finding out late can be a little bit more stressful. Next. So when we talk about defining your KPIs, there's a lot to choose from, and this doesn't nearly cover all of it, but just to give you a sense of what some of the areas are to think about. If you're in a membership organization, it can be around increasing membership, growing targeted products among existing clients, increasing downloads of mobile applications, or just increasing your brand awareness with ways to measure against that. Increasing engagement with commercial products or other entities. You can also look to growing customer loyalty and retention, especially in the personalization space. When it's happening the right way, this can be a natural byproduct of it. Also understanding kind of the average lifespan of a customer value and how you can extend that is really important. And then thinking in terms of increasing engagement, even by geography. There's a lot of opportunity within the data collection to recognize where people are and then align what you're doing if geographic is a factor for your success, to really take advantage of that. And in terms of tracking performance, you could look at things like tracking page visits, what the bounce rate is along the journey, tracking their implicit interests across multiple channels. And this can be something that is really good to have internal conversations around on a frequent basis. It can be very subjective. So understanding that collectively can be really helpful. Understanding what your page traffic is through things like Google, how far people are scrolling down a page, what they're using on a mobile versus a desktop. All of these things can really inform, especially the user experience designer and others, to put together a plan and deliverables that really align with what your understanding of their behavior is through their web traffic experience. Next. And then you want to determine what data is most important. And so that can include everything from demographic information, what type of customer they are, creating user personas to really articulate their kind of a whole view of what their world is, both online and off, as well as within your site, as well as outside. So maybe they have expectations that are raised because they are frequent Amazon users. These are good things to have in the mix as you're trying to understand them. You also want to understand sometimes what stage in their career they are, or maybe if you're in a membership organization, sometimes associations might have junior members that they want to speak to one way, and then they don't need to worry as much about the vernacular with people that are more experienced in the field. And again, geolocation can also be super helpful. And again, there's much more, but thinking about how to map these and really continually evolving it is a really big factor with the overall success. Next. And then you want to, once you have this information, once you have these perspectives on the users, you want to really put together user journeys that prioritize who your most important users are. And there's a lot of different approaches to this. One way to think about it is using what's called a PI framework, which stands for potential, importance, and ease. So from a potential perspective, you want to understand how much improvement can be made to their experience. You want to understand how valuable the user is to decide how important they are. Do you want to maybe choose a different persona first to make sure you're getting kind of the lowest hanging fruit and the most value as quickly as possible? And then from an ease perspective, you want to understand how easy is this going to be, or how difficult is this going to be to identify users and understand them and really test against it. And then from there, you can also use what are called digital relevancy maps, which are like a grid view that really helps describe personas and the stages they are in a funnel, the content that they're experiencing, and the functionality that they're encountering. The more you can kind of put the whole picture in front of your internal team, it really helps expose some flaws and gaps to make your team as prepared to respond to what might be challenges down the road. Next. So next, we're going to talk about reviewing behavioral data. And I can't emphasize enough that skepticism can be your best friend in this space. Next. So when we talk about behavioral data, we're going to give a brief overview about it. We're going to talk about some of the gaps you can avoid and some ways to fill those gaps. Next. So what is behavior data? We look at it as being any collected data as a customer or visitor moves through a bank or another organization's digital space. And this can include what devices they're using, how they got to your website, how long they were on the site, what they clicked on. You can track down to the button level, pages they visited, how they scroll, where they jump off, what videos they engage with, how far along in the videos, even things like what they search for within your site. There's a lot of reporting that can be pulled from different content management systems to help influence that. And then you can also eventually map some of that to the users themselves with advanced personalization tools. Next. In terms of common gaps, there's a lot of areas when you have most sites. I feel like most people who are going to embark upon this journey don't just have a single digital platform. They have a content management system. They might have a shopping cart. They might have an AMS system. They might have a Salesforce. There's a lot of opportunities for gaps to happen because you're not pulling all the data together the way you should. And it's never going to be perfect, and it's never going to be done on the first try. But just being able to recognize where these possible gaps are is a really important piece of the puzzle. Thinking about things that are partially integrated. Sometimes direction flows one way, but not both ways. And then obviously the everyday challenge we all have of information overload. Getting a bunch of data that could be helpful is great, but if you don't have the ability to sort of put it together, it's not going to help you as much. Let's move on. And so as we're talking about data and we're talking about communicating data internally, it's a real challenge. And I think a lot of people have a phobia around it, the way some people have a phobia around math. And I found this book by a woman named Nancy Duarte to be super helpful. And you may recognize the name, or if you've ever seen the movie An Inconvenient Truth, she did all the presentation slides for that. She's been in this space of presenting story through a lot of different tools for years. And she likes to talk about data not speaking for itself, but it really needs a storyteller. I can't recommend this book highly enough, and I think it could be the kind of thing that could really help make the case internally to really affect the change you're looking for, whether you're doing personalization or just trying to make the case for other things within your organization. Thanks. And so as you're thinking about the data you want to measure, it's also really good to understand, against what, compared to what. And I happened upon this tweet a little while back from a former US Olympic gymnast that talks about every Olympic event should include one average person competing for reference. And it made me laugh instantly. And I think it's a good way to keep in mind. There are ways to compare things that might not always be obvious. But if you don't have a baseline to compare things to, you could end up being not as calibrated as you could be to really be effective in the change you're trying to affect. Next. So the other thing about gaps is that, I think we have a duplicate slide here, but the other thing to keep in mind with this is that people are going to do what they're going to do. And so you can have a well-paved path towards a door you want them to go through. But if people have an alternate way to get there, a good example of this is you can have a really thought out navigation, but if they just go to the search box, then all the work you put into the information architecture, it's kind of for naught. And so understanding how people could potentially use the site, not just what you intend them to do, is really important. Next slide.
Great. So next we're going to discuss segmenting your users based on data. And I'll start by sharing a couple of statistics that really drive home the growing expectation for personalization among users. So 80% of consumers are more likely to make a purchase when brands offer personalized experiences. And 67% of consumers think it's important for brands to automatically adjust content based on the current context. And 42% of consumers get quote unquote annoyed when brands don't automatically adjust. So with the understanding that a personalized experience has really become the expectation for the majority of consumers, it's important for you to identify user segments for your various personas that Chad mentioned. So this means identifying user segments in your target markets that behave alike. So this might be organization members, policymakers, healthcare, or educational institutions. Another example specific to banking might include investing elites, comfortable empty nesters, or ambitious professionals. So this can best be achieved through a crawl, walk, run approach, which really means starting with one or two personas and developing a good rhythm. So the crawl is really around the listening piece and collecting data and understanding what you want to prioritize and understanding what those segmented personas behavior is like. We really recommend targeting a couple personas to start with and not trying to do everything at once. People who have tried something similar in a social media space, you might find that they try to commit to too many channels and you end up with a lot of gaps and lack a consistent flow of content that help drive interest. So similarly, if you try to speak to too many personas at once, you could end up diminishing the impact you have on all of them. So moving into the walk, this is as much about getting your own internal rhythm as it is finding the best data for your members. So it's critical to make sure that you and your team are comfortable with the level of effort, especially if you are a smaller group and you have multiple people wearing multiple hats. It's important to recognize the bandwidth and adjust accordingly as you move from walking to running and expanding your offerings.
So now we're going to talk about content creation. And I think the key to remember here is that you want to make sure that where it's appropriate and where there's variation, possibilities for variation, that you're aligning that content you put together with the personas that you're creating. Next slide. And because this is so much work, we figured you're probably going to need not just one cup of coffee, but the whole pot. There's a lot that you can personalize, whether it's on a website, mobile device, social media, email, interactive tools. There's a lot of different things you can create in a personalization space to really engage with your audience. That can be, different descriptions, how-to videos, product summaries. You can have, the more understanding you have about a particular audience or individual, you can start to explain how a specific product or solution might work for their specific needs if you have that information. The other thing to keep in mind is that there's a lot of subtle changes that can be customized. So it's not just about blocks of text. Buttons can be changed on a page depending on an audience. You can pass along pre-existing data into forms. So if you are working with someone that you've been able to identify pieces of what they're about and they submit a form, there's ways to marry what was anonymous about them into a better understanding of a profile that could help perhaps a sales representative or somebody following up from a contact form to just have a fuller picture of who they are. And I like to think of this as kind of a digital handshake, that people are telling you often what they are looking for. And so it becomes this responsibility of yours whenever possible to marry that with content that's relevant to their needs. Next. So 65% of marketers indicate that they feel overwhelmed by the need to create more content. And I feel like that number's low personally. It's a daunting task, but it's something to keep in mind that a lot of people are in the same boat, but it doesn't mean that there aren't ways to keep moving forward with it. Next. So one thing that's a really helpful trick is just to have persona-based editorial calendars. This can be kind of a rubber meets the road opportunity to put the content that you're planning into a form that you can really scan it and see how it maps, see what the cadence is, see how it articulates what the expectation is. And you can also align these things around announcements or events or promotions, et cetera. And you want to make sure that as you're going through this, you want to answer these questions around who is this content serving? What problem is this content addressing? What added value does the content have to that persona? And if you feel like you're not answering those questions with the ideas and the content you're putting together, it may be worth just pausing and making sure that you can answer them or having the right conversations internally to see if maybe someone else has the answer to that. Next. And you also want to be very careful about checking for context and tone. Sometimes two people, Lauren and I write a lot of proposals together, and we could probably both write almost the same content for certain pieces of a proposal, but we could still write them in different ways. And if you were to take that and sort of apply it into a situation where you have content that might be more standard and structured for the whole audience versus some that's targeted for an individual, you might find subtle differences that can be inadvertently confusing. So you want to make sure that everything that's being put out from a personalization perspective is being evaluated for what that user is experiencing. And that's where we were talking about that advocate for the customer experience. So as you do that, you can understand, how people might react differently to this similar content or content that's written differently. Understanding, will this content improve their perception of your value, and understanding what the targeted messaging is and where the conflicts might be that you could avoid ahead of time. And thinking too about how it resonates. And this is a really good time to be humble, self-critical, communicative, and proactive to not ever jump on somebody for doing it quote unquote wrong, but recognizing that there's something that you can make better to really enhance that user experience. And then even as you're thinking about things like the physical nature of where somebody is, or what time of day they're receiving it, or what time of year people are receiving it. Sometimes you think you have a piece of content you could reuse, but it was actually written right around the new year, and there might be some vague reference to the new year that you didn't catch. And then it just comes off flat because you did all the hard work, but just not catching that one piece can really throw it off a little bit. So it's just about understanding the people are people at the end of the day, and that everything is relative to context. And so that's no different with the tools that we're talking about creating. Next slide. So this doesn't get into a lot of the implementation piece. Most places are still kind of in this early listening and gathering data phase. We are working with organizations on that front, and we would really love to have a conversation with you about your needs and where you're at. And if there's anything that you'd like to just reach out and pick our brains about, we're more than happy to talk. We're based in the DC area, happy to meet in person, but we've been online meetings for so much now that it almost feels more second nature than the in-person meeting. So I want to thank everybody again for their time. And Lauren, any closing thoughts?
No, I just really enjoyed being here today. And like Chad said, we'd love to continue speaking with everybody, and we'd love to answer any questions that you guys have.
Thank you all very much for doing this. It's been fantastic, and I believe helpful for all of us on the WBC team that are on this call.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chad. Thanks, Lauren. Thanks
Thank
for
you
everybody
guys.
else who's joining.